So in the spirit of crowdsourcing, I'm going to let you think about the title of my presentation, and hopefully you can give me some input to the question at the end of my presentation. And in fact, this presentation, while it's addressed to you, a crowdsourcing audience, I'm going to present principally on cloud computing and what we at the Asia Cloud Computing Association is doing. But I'm hoping that the parallels that I start talking about you see applying to crowdsourcing, and also it might actually get you to think as opposed to sit back. So you got to do some work in this presentation. You got to think about some of the things I'm saying. So first of all, a little bit about our association. We were founded 3 years ago. Well, almost 4 years ago now, actually, and our mission is to accelerate the adoption of cloud across Asia Pacific. And we do that by engaging stakeholders, providing tools to educate people. If you go to our website, you can find some of those tools, and really build some advocacy in terms of removing barriers to using cloud computing and getting the benefits of cloud computing. So you can go to our website, asiacloudcomputing.org, or contact us at info@cloudcomputing. We've focused on three principal areas: public policy and regulation, and we've produced a cloud readiness index. So we just published our third one, the Cloud Computing, or the CRI 2014, which we launched in the Philippines about a month ago. We've also published a data sovereignty study. So data sovereignty in cloud computing and in general in the internet has become a big deal, especially with some of the things that have gone on around what NSA supposedly did, and some of the revelations that Snowden made recently. Data sovereignty has become a bigger issue, but certainly we didn't use that to publish our study. We'd been working on it for about a year, and we published it around in December of last year. And then we're also working on a cloud index on how small and medium enterprises can make the best use of cloud computing in terms of adopting it, and what sectors of small and medium enterprises across Asia Pacific are, if you want, low-hanging fruit from their perspective in terms of benefits for using cloud computing. So that's about the Asia Cloud Computing Association. Certainly, if you're interested, visit our website, contact us, let us know how you want to participate in the conversation around cloud. So, for those of you who have been involved in cloud computing, there is an accepted definition, 5 common characteristics of cloud computing as defined by NIST in the US. So one is on-demand self-service. Now, how many of you would agree that to a certain degree, crowdsourcing has that characteristic, right? It's, typically we use it on demand, right? Our previous speaker talked about MH370, and of course, that only became a problem to be looked at and crowdsourced on demand, right? It was when it happened, right? Now, whether it's self-service or not, I don't know if we're quite there with crowdsourcing, but there's plenty of sites that allow us to go there and use it in a self-service way. Rapid elasticity, right? TomNot is a great example of that, right? How many people are looking at it? 15 million people contributing, right? In terms of elasticity, right? Being able to get from no one up to 15 million in a quick time is an example. Certainly cloud computing has that characteristics. Broad network access. Well, I put network in parentheses for a reason. Broad network access certainly is a characteristic of cloud computing, And certainly if you're going to use it, and Tomnod, for example, needs it at the back end, but you don't necessarily need, you need broad access, but you might not need, it really depends on the need of the problem, right? Whether you, so it's broad to match the need of the problem. Resource pooling. Right, Tomnod, using that example again, right, talked about the power of the human brain, right? If we think of the human brain as a resource, okay, it's not a resource that we control like we do in cloud computing, right, where that's an Intel chip with Intel memory, but it's still, right, the power of the human brain is there. And if we leverage all of that in terms of pooling, there's great things that we can achieve. And of course, that's related to rapid elasticity, but certainly that resource pooling comes into play. And I like the idea that he talked about is taking it to the second tier of saying, okay, now that we've made some decisions about, let's say, 100 sites, let's bring in some experts to look at those 100 sites and decide how we narrow that down to 5 sites, right? And so that's, if you want, resource pooling, but looking at your resources from a tiered perspective, right? And certainly, crowdsourcing has that. And it's a measured service, right? Now, you could argue that maybe not for necessarily Tomnod, although they charge for their service, obviously. And it really depends where you are and how you're using crowdsourcing. If you're using crowdsourcing, let's say if you look at it from an ELANS perspective, obviously there you're measuring the service and you're paying for the service that you're getting, right, on a pay-per-use basis, as opposed to on a, well, I need these 15 million people all the time, right? No, I only need them for this particular use, and I'll pay whatever the payment is, right, for that particular service. So that was the 5 common characteristics of cloud computing. I think many of you would agree that crowdsourcing has similar characteristics. If you look at it from types of sourcing, right? So we talk about crowdsourcing. Is crowdsourcing only a public way of doing it? You know, I work, the chairman of the Asia Cloud Computing Association is a night job that I have. My day job is I'm the cloud CTO at Cisco here in the region. We use crowdsourcing at Cisco all the time, internally, right, to do things. So there's, if you want, crowdsourcing has this agility element, agility of development element that we use on a in-house, on a private basis, right? Obviously, there's the public sites. I talked about ELANS. There's many others. There's also, in industries, communities forming where we're getting crowdsourcing. We could say patient innovation is a type of community sourcing for one particular disease, right? And then you have 7,000 communities, maybe. Right? Or there's a hybrid model, and really that's, in cloud computing, everybody's talking about hybrid cloud computing, where you're actually building a framework for IT that actually leverages resources in public clouds, in private clouds, in community clouds, and bringing them together to solve particular IT problems. The same thing we're seeing in crowdsourcing is companies are looking at, how do I use private crowdsourcing? How do I use traditional innovation methods? How do I use private cloud? How do I use public crowdsourcing? Right? And use that in a hybrid model. And that's where, you know, I'm not an expert in the area of organizational innovation and so on, but certainly that's where organizations are moving towards using these mixed models of innovations and also this hybrid type approach. So trend number 1 in cloud computing, and I'm going to present 5 trends in cloud computing, and try to relate it to crowd, at least as much as I know about crowdsourcing. So cloud computing is growing 6 times faster than legacy ICT. Okay, this is taken from data from IDC in 2013. And you see that cloud computing, right, is still a very small fraction of ICT. Look at crowdsourcing, right? The statistic that I was able to find in my quick research on crowdsourcing, right? Crowdsourcing is still less than 1% of freelance work that's being done, right? By 2020, it's expected to be a $10 billion industry, which will be possibly 2% of freelance work. Right? Cloud computing is a little bit ahead of that, right? It'll be 6%. This is in Asia Pacific. It'll be 6%. It'll be a $1 trillion industry. Cloud computing will be worldwide in 2020, and what that'll represent maybe 12% in the world, but only 6% in Asia Pacific. So Asia Pacific, we have some work to do as an association to help accelerate that, but that's what analysts are predicting. So similar, I think, trends in cloud computing. Crowd is growing at somewhere between 30 and 40% per year, right? Trend number 2, data sovereignty. I touched on it. This is a graph taken from our data sovereignty study and looks at the 14 countries in Asia Pacific, the 14 major economies in Asia Pacific, and looks to see where is data sovereignty an issue, right? Or what countries are best set up from a data sovereignty perspective, right? And now there's a lot of data behind here. In fact, there's 700 pages of data behind this particular chart. And obviously, I don't have the time to go through it. But one of the questions maybe that we need to think about, or you as a crowdsourcing community need to think about, is how will governments get involved in crowdsourcing, right, in maybe putting up barriers to crowdsourcing, and can we as a community inform governments, if you want, ahead of time, proactively, in order to not put these barriers in place, or think twice about how to, the types of barriers in place. Give you an example, right? Data sovereignty is a huge issue in the banking area, right? Governments are stepping in and saying, no, you can't do this with people's data and so on and so forth. This is all in the interest of privacy of consumers, right, or customers. Okay, true enough, but maybe we don't have to do a blanket rule on cloud computing in banking. Maybe we can look at tiers of data and what data needs to stay in-house, on-premise, what data can be outsourced to cloud computing groups within country, the data sovereignty piece, and then what data can go anywhere in the world, right? Let's not put a blanket rule. Putting blanket rules is easy. It's easier to measure, but it doesn't necessarily help organizations, helps industries take advantage of technologies like cloud computing. Likewise with crowdsourcing. I'm sure there's plenty of things that you can think of as an audience in terms of where governments might be thinking of putting regulations in order that might actually put the brakes on crowdsourcing. Okay, we have leaders and followers. Another trend is this idea, and this data comes from Cisco's Global Cloud Index, which we publish every year. And we're looking at traffic and the trends in traffic between what's happening in cloud data centers and in non or traditional data centers. And 2013, 2014 is that year, that tipping point where we're seeing more data in cloud computing. If I showed you another chart with the amount of workloads in cloud computing, we're actually getting much more in cloud computing. Remember, though, cloud computing is still only 6%, right? Or 2%. So something doesn't add up. Well, it does add up, I'm about to tell you why, is the reason we're getting so much data in cloud computing is because the applications tend to be a lot more chatty. They talk to each other. They exchange information. They get information from data sets that are in other cloud computing data centers. So we're getting a lot of that intra-data center traffic. When you think about crowdsourcing, isn't one of the tenets of crowdsourcing this collaboration where we're getting hundreds, thousands, millions of people contributing to a particular problem, a lot of exchange of information, even though it might not be explicit exchange, certainly implicit exchange of information. So that same trend, I think, is we're seeing, that we see in cloud computing, we're witnessing in crowdsourcing. Another trend, and this is related to Asia Cloud Computing Association's Cloud Readiness Index, is how ready some countries are for cloud computing. And now, I'm not going to venture into this for crowdsourcing. I'm going to leave that to you, for those of you who are from different countries, and I know that there's different nationalities from Asia Pacific represented in this room, right? How ready is a country in terms of adopting crowdsourcing, right? In different industries, or having the the right infrastructure in place, the right regulatory environment in place, right? The right, from a cloud computing perspective, the right views from a data perspective, right? So we rank the 14 countries again in terms of these three areas, right? So certainly the top band there are ready, right? And those 6 countries have been at the top of our cloud computing readiness index for the last 3 years. They've been moving up and down, and of course there's plenty of boasting that goes on between countries. Oh, I'm slightly ahead of you here, but pretty much all of those countries are in that top band. The interesting band is the middle band, where we're seeing actually countries putting up some extra effort in terms of putting some focused focused efforts around improving their position in cloud computing. And the Philippines is one of those countries where we've seen them move from number 14 in the original index, and now they're up into this middle band. And then other, if you want, developing economies, okay, cloud computing might not be on the top of their agenda. Certainly, China and India have cloud computing as part of their 5-year plans, but I wouldn't say it's one of their top focus areas. So lots of work to be done. And from a crowdsourcing perspective, maybe we need to think about that. And how do we help governments in different parts of Asia Pacific be more ready for crowdsourcing? And best practices abound. And this is done a little bit tongue-in-cheek, right? You see where it comes from, right? Where we're seeing a lot of, in this cartoon, right? A lot of cloud-like environment in a data center, right? And the idea, as the cartoon says, right, is the dry ice to try to keep the data center cool. No, in fact, the operators want to feel they're on the cloud, right? Everybody wants to be in cloud computing. Well, aside from the buzz around cloud computing, there are a lot of benefits from using cloud, and we have loads of examples of organizations making use of cloud. And we heard with regard to the search around MH370 is how they've used cloud computing, right? They used Amazon Web Services and to leverage, if you want, cloud computing for $80,000. That's relatively, sounds like a lot of money, but it's relatively inexpensive to what it would have cost had you tried to stand up that infrastructure yourself, right? You would be talking about tens of millions of dollars. So certainly that's a good example of the benefits of cloud computing. So what does the future hold for cloud computing and crowdsourcing? And I think I'll venture to say that big data and these collection of data sets that we're having, whether it's TomNod or other areas, is an area where cloud computing and crowdsourcing actually can come together. Right? The Internet of Things, if that's an area that you've heard of, certainly where we have sensor data and we're generating all this sensor data, how do we actually maximize the use of that sensor data? Can we get the crowd to help us make use of it? Now, there are things that you can do from a technology perspective to make use of that data, obviously, right? And there's areas like cloud computing and an emerging area called fog computing, which is related to the Internet of Things. But certainly, the crowd can help here in terms of if you're interested in a particular set of data. And there's an example that I used recently about, for example, cycling areas. You know, where can you cycle where there is a minimum amount of traffic? I'm a cyclist myself, and I know by experience what time I cycle and where I cycle in Singapore in order to minimize the amount of traffic and minimize the risk of getting into an accident. But if we had data available from the local traffic authority, and then on our own we could either make those decisions or as a crowd make those decisions about where the best place to cycle is and at what time, we might have a lot of cyclists there, but at least we wouldn't have a lot of cars. So certainly that's an area where crowdsourcing and cloud computing can come together. And this last slide taken, a picture taken off the internet, and I have attributed in the notes where I got it from, but the idea here is many pairs of eyes looking at the data, looking at it from their own perspective. And I think a number of our speakers have talked about that, is, you know, we have experts in the medical field that approach a problem from one direction. We have patients with the disease who approach it from a different area. We have caregivers approaching it from a different perspective. And we might have, if you want, what we would consider non-interested parties also looking at the data from their perspective. Each one can bring a different perspective to it, and leveraging that for crowdsourcing using cloud computing is another way I think that the future can bring these two areas together. So you decide. Cloud, and I did make the spelling mistake on purpose. Crowd and cloud, are they synonyms or homonyms, right? Are they 100% aligned? I'll get you to vote in a second. Are they ships in the night? They're similar, but they're on parallel tracks. They don't really depend on each other, right? Is there 50% commonality and similarity between them? Is it a 25% overlap, or they have nothing to do with each other except they're almost homonyms? Okay, so with that, I'll end there, but before I go, I'll just get you to vote. So who thinks number one, 100% aligned? Okay, we got one person over here, off camera, if you want. Two, who are ships in the night? They're similar, but they're on parallel tracks. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay, 50% commonality and similarity. Okay, so that's a slightly more than 13. I'm not going to count all those, but there's probably 15 or close to 18. 25% overlap. 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, great. And then last one. Okay, well, that's great. So we'll go with 50% commonality and similarity. The crowd has voted, and thank you very much.